Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Delighted to be joined with me by another battery doctor, Dr. Ian Campbell from Breathe Battery Technologies. Ian, great to have you with us.
Yeah, likewise, David. Pleasure to be here. So thanks so much for having us on.
Cool. So it's clearly an area which fascinates me from a techie nerd point of view, but also obviously more importantly from the energy and mobility transition. Batteries are fundamentally a part of that. And it's great to see companies like yours who are bringing fairly innovative uses of both, in your instance, software, in other instances, hardware, which enable that transition to accelerate. So really keen to dig into a little bit about the solution you provide and how that aids and how that sort of moves forward the mobility transition in particular. But before we do that, perhaps you can just give us a little bit of your backstory in terms of how you came to actually co-found Breathe and where and how you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. It did start some years ago now, actually, as a teenager, or barely a teenager, when I got quite invested in this hobby of radio control, model car racing quite seriously across Europe and the UK and Ireland. And they ran on engines fueled by some fuel, but at the same time, they had then these electronic systems in them, the servos, the receivers, and so on. They were powered by these wonderfully colorful, magical little nickel cadmium batteries originally of all shapes and sizes.
Yeah. Then
nickel metal hydride as the sort of technology evolved with their own sort of nuanced behaviors. And then a little bit later on, as I got a bit older, lithium ion. And I found then particularly, the behaviors of all of these batteries, particularly when they failed, but then also the, say, charging methods, the mechanisms by which they operated, I found them fascinating. Although I think at the time I didn't necessarily understand what the mechanisms by which they were failing, but their operation still fascinating. Quite some years later, as I went through then sort of, let's say, the professional development, the career, started to see then in sort of a much larger scale of automotive world, what was happening and what needed to happen with electrification and the battery system to enable then a decarbonized transport system and also to enable then, let's say, the air quality that we want to achieve, particularly in these kind of city environments. And that was, coincidentally, perhaps so related to what I had experienced with my hobbies in the motorsport areas. And then I spent then a number of years at Imperial College London researching the limitations of battery systems to really extract what it was that was causing them to cost what they cost and to perform to the level that they perform at today and why that couldn't be bettered. And I pursued that research then through a number of methods, partly simulation and mathematical development for battery modeling, and then also experimental methods, particularly to diagnose battery health so that we could develop better control strategies with a feedback loop of understanding the effect it was having on their health.
Right.
And then towards the end of that PhD program, co-founded Breathe Battery Technologies, where today I'm the CEO and one of a co-founding team of 3, really then to drive the talent, the investment over a long time horizons to move on that frontier of what's possible with particularly lithium ion battery systems.
Right. So I can get the leap from a young guy who's, I guess you said, obviously hobbies which lead to looking at technologies and how things work and how things fail, as you suggested. So the leap from there, I guess, to going on to study physics and going on to obviously achieve your PhD is one thing. But how then do you feel and how do you make that step to think, and actually we've got something here which is sufficient to monetize from a business point of view, and I'm the guy who can lead it as a CEO, certainly at the present time. So how was that as a journey? Is that something you'd always thought of becoming a business owner, a business entrepreneur, if you like, or how did that evolve?
I think that although not having had the experience of having done it full time, let's say before here today with Breathe, I think that it was always of interest. And I think then from an academic perspective, between studying mechanical engineering as an undergraduate in Dublin in Ireland, and then going down the route of going, let's say, deeply technical into the battery system limitations with the PhD, I did spend a year at University College London then studying for a business master's because I had that interest in, I think, let's say, creating it through commercialization, through revenue generation, through running a profitable enterprise that then creates the employment opportunities for a bunch of team members, making that bridge happen between technology and then the end user impact. And I think that we quite successfully managed to follow through with that on a much larger scale than my individual interest in the company today. Yeah. Where we then managed to connect, let's say, very deep technology investments and developments all the way through then to the longevity enhancements with Breathe Life of the battery system, and then also the, let's say, charge experience enhancements with Breathe Charge. So making that journey happen, let's say the transition commercially, certainly interested in it, passionate about it. Getting significantly more experienced with it these years, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, let's touch upon that, because Imperial College has there must be something great in the water there. We had many moons ago, actually, in one of the earlier podcasts, Dr. Billy Wu from Imperial on the podcast, and more recently, you probably saw the guys at About Energy who've kind of spun out from a similar environment. So again, what's I guess the support mechanisms there, or how do you get to a point of knowing that your research then is ready to spin out and you create this legal entity, this business entity? How did that sort of evolve? When did you get to this sort of maybe the eureka moment that says, actually, we've got something here which we can now commercialize?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Imperial as an ecosystem, I think, is and has been for us as a good example, incredibly supportive of trying to ensure that the research that takes place in that university and the brain power that is, let's say, housed there, then does get, maybe through commercialization in many cases, all the way through then to the end user impact. So I think ecosystem-wise, they're incredibly strong at it, even before we look internally at ourselves or our journey. I think they have many activities there, including a bunch of, let's say, programs like Venture Catalyst Challenge, where we won the energy and environment track initially in the early days of the company. They have an enterprise lab that's full of incredibly talented people that are then helping these kind of early, let's say, business concepts and business model canvas type assessments to try and extract product market fit.
Right.
I think it's certainly, I wouldn't say that for anybody, but for us, I mean, it doesn't happen in one moment as a eureka moment. But I think on the back of then, let's say, developing the technical understanding at the level of depth that we did collaboratively, me not alone, but with our CTO, Yan, or Dr. Yan Zhao, our Chief Tech Officer, brilliant Chinese battery engineer, and then Greg, our Professor Greg Offer, our Chief Scientist, and a brilliant British electrochemist, sort of building the technology understanding and seeing very clearly why they were limited to what they were limited to, and then finding, let's say, some initial grant funding to allow ourselves then to go full time to the point where we could, outside then the university environment, test the validity of the commercial assumptions and the technical problems with live customers and a real customer base, and get the company in its very early days to the point that it was revenue generating.
Right.
And then we could essentially validate product market fit early on the back of then having revenue as a proof point. Yeah. That allowed us to have confidence that we were, let's say, pointing them in a very accurate commercial direction in which then we could revenue and let's say, fund in a number of different ways our route forwards. So I think that was the, let's say, closest thing to a eureka moment, I think, was then the sort of real hardcore testing with serious brands once we had spun out.
Right. And when was that a spin out moment, or when did you actually form the legal entity?
Yeah, we incorporated in 2019 as we spun out of the university then. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about the company and the technology. You obviously founded and called it Breathe. I know you work with consumer electronics as well as batteries for EVs, for example. But what was the story firstly behind Breathe? And then perhaps you can share what is your ultimate mission as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the naming is coming a little bit from this, let's say, play on what we do every day, where we spend the hours, the energy, investing our time in living and breathing battery technologies. But then simultaneously, this of course, this wordplay on what's happening around us with the increasing parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, the damage that's taking place to the climate. Yeah. Partly from transport emissions, but then also partly from really this, I think, it's a cultural attitude that we have globally towards consumer electronics devices being somewhat consumable. Yeah. Across both audio, laptops, smartphones, and wearables, which is one of our major markets that we operate in today. Right. And really trying on the electrification or the transport side to electrify, to decarbonize and solve air pollution issues there. But then on the consumer electronic side, trying to increase the longevity and the experience of these devices to a point where they're no longer so consumable. Right. And I think that we see many other great companies out there today making efforts towards that as well. But we play a strong role on the battery side. Okay. And so tell us a little bit more then, Ian, about the actual technology and the sort of immediate solutions you solve for your clients. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like with that sort of context around the climate and air pollution for, let's say, why we started and why we called it what we did, I mean, the mission that we are fulfilling with many great brands like Oppo, like Volvo, and these organizations around the world today is it's enabling them to do more with the power that they have. And that is really helping them then just extract significantly more out of the materials that they're pulling out of the earth, be that they be nickel or be that the graphite for the anode in the battery, and to extract significantly more, let's say, end user experience or value out of then the battery system that they are building or paying the rest of their supply chain for. And today, with the first 2 products that we ship now on the market, and one of those, Breathe Life, is on very many millions of Oppo smartphones that are available in the stores today.
Right.
Breathe Charge, we've recently, just prior to us having this session today, we've very recently announced then quite a large sourcing agreement with Volvo. We will supply the charging for their next generation electric car platform, the Breathe Charge. This sort of mechanism that we then provide our products to our customers is via embedded software. So we give them an embedded software function that we collaborate with their software engineering team to integrate into an electric car or a consumer electronics device. And it looks after the charging current across a number of different timescales. So during the charging process, and also then over the longevity of the life of that product. So maybe that's the 11-year car life, or the 2 or 3 or 5-year laptop life. And it manages the charging so as to extract significantly more performance out of the battery and say what's latent or tied up in the materials in it, but at the same time to then protect the battery health. And that then is really providing our customers, the big brands that are on the driveway or on the desk in front of us, an opportunity that is complementary to everything they're getting from their cell suppliers and their cell manufacturers. And an opportunity to extend or improve attributes of their battery system without having to make the painful trade-offs that they're so used to having to make to trade off another attribute to achieve that. And this is really, let's say, a holy grail for them and a huge release.
Okay, so there's obviously a lot of battery management systems out there. Do you sort of sit or embed yourself within other BMSs, or is yours the BMS itself, which incorporates your unique technologies and algorithms, or however that functions?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important, of course, for us and for our customers to understand the relationship between our products and the battery management system. We ourselves, we don't provide or develop a battery management system. There are many companies out there that do. And many times the customers that we engage with, they produce a battery management system in-house themselves. And if we take even one step back from us, the battery management system itself, especially in electric vehicle environments, but on a smaller scale in consumer electronics as well, it really consists of maybe three layers if we simplify it. There's the hardware platform, or the PCB or the circuit board on which anyone can install some software functionality. There's then a safety layer that is responsible for ensuring the safety of the battery system throughout its lifetime. And then there's an application layer. And that application layer then provides some of the sort of user level visibility, like state of charge, as well as then having the responsibility for extracting the performance from the battery system. And what we do is we, in partnership to these major brands, we help them then to extract more from the overall battery system, enhance their value proposition by injecting a very small amount of software into that application layer. And today, replacing a rather outdated charging strategy that's usually then provided on an A4 piece of paper on a data sheet from the cell manufacturer upstream. And I think this is where, if we look at, let's say, the evolution of this industry, the innovation today and the wording from our customers in these markets, it's all around software-defined vehicles and software-defined systems. And the iPhone, the laptop, I mean, these are already well software-defined. And it's absolutely going the same direction with batteries, where the value in battery systems is either on one end in the new chemistry and materials developments, or else in making them software defined once they're designed and built. And the interim component in the context of battery management, that hardware platform, the PCB on which the battery management occurs, is itself becoming commoditized and isn't factoring into, let's say, the future of differentiation for these brands.
Okay. You touched on there in the sort of the trade-offs between, do you want to charge faster or do you want more cycles and a longer battery life? So how does that sort of interplay? Do you solve one or both, or can you do both of those things with the solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we look at like the say space that our customers and these brands that we buy our cars or our electronics from have to operate in, it's heavily constrained. They have cost, which is an enormous, say parameter, an enormous focus for them. They have safety, on which they can't ever compromise,
Sure.
and that's completely justifiable and sensible. And then they have a number of battery attributes that they're trading essentially with cost. And that's usually charging speed. It's usually the longevity or the durability, and then the battery world measured usually in a combination of cycles or cycle life plus then calendar life or aging, how long it can sit on a shelf. And they have then as well the energy density, which defines the range for the car or the runtime for the electronics devices. And traditionally, this industry, the last decades, I mean, the last century of batteries, I mean, it's not necessarily a straightforward process, but many battery engineers, they're out there today working with the battery systems to then make a trade-off between these different attributes, sort of on a sort of scale or a spectrum of like 0 to 1, trading them off against each other to create the sort of end user experience that the product offering requires. But that then is a very rock and a hard place environment. It's not an enjoyable one to be in, and it's not overall a positive one for the manufacturer, the brands to be in either. So then what we're enabling them to do is to significantly expand one of these attributes without then negatively impacting others. Right. With Recharge, that focuses on the charging experience, maybe more holistically the charge time, and this consistency, its reliability, breathe life on the longevity side. But fundamentally, the reason that this is possible is that the battery materials and the battery designs that are created today, they're relatively far more capable than we ever see as end users when we buy the product in the market.
Yeah.
I think rather frustratingly, what happens is that between the time that battery gets designed, which might have been 3, 4, or 5 years ago, by the time it reaches our hands, a number of throttling scenarios get applied to that battery to reduce its capability, to account for really a need to be, let's say, overly conservative today in control, because control today is so based on these data sheets or these numbers that are programmed onto a page, right? And I think that leaves then this enormous opportunity to come along with software to replace the numbers on a page for the control of the battery system, and then to be much more dynamic with the control and to extract then significantly more performance out of it.
Cool. So how do you then, going back to yourself and your journey, then cope, or how did you find moving from that sort of laboratory and theoretical environment to creating the company and then starting obviously to commercialize and therefore pick up customers? So how did you personally find that, and what were some of the perhaps the biggest challenges and maybe some early successes in that transition? Because clearly you have customers and you obviously have traction as a business, but what was that initial transition like for you personally and for the business?
Yeah, I think it was very enjoyable in the sense that I got to experience from a personal perspective, I got to experience more corporate functions than I could have in any, I think, other job or any other role where I managed to, I suppose, be heavily involved in the engineering, the initial development of intellectual property in the company, the patents, the product, all the way through to marketing, finance, sales, and operations, and all of these areas. Yeah. So I think it's been a whirlwind tour of corporate functions. I think that personally very, very enjoyable. I'd say certainly always learning in that respect, and still very much today as we bring in significantly more skills in house and significantly more talent than we've ever had in the company to date, and still very much learning then from our incredible team here. I think for us making that journey or that transition, let's say, from the lab environments to then applications, and to driving then like significant revenue and significant deal sizes in the back of some of our big customers, and supporting them in the way that we set out to do. I think that has been probably the most, although I talk about it in terms of the personal enjoyment of it, I think it's been the most important thing for the company, because I think what we see so often happen in batteries across both academia and industry with other startups is the failure, regardless of the failure mechanism. Let's say that the failure point tends to be in the translation or lack of translation of something that is maybe technologically innovative and effective in a laboratory environment, and translating that then through to the system scale, maybe above a battery cell to a large battery pack, where you then have a number of other subsystems that interact with it, like in an automotive environment where you have very active thermal management system, you have an inverter, you have a motor controller, you have electronics, and then you have a human in there who's influencing the entire system by turning on or off the aircon for maybe their family in the backseat or something like this. And that translation exercise is, I think, probably the most important area. I think that maybe through a combination of, I think, having really almost real-time feedback from customers early on in the days of the company, and then having it like total customer focus. We've managed to, I think, achieve that in a way that's rather differentiated. And today we've managed then as a business to take, let's say, physics-based battery models that have traditionally only ever been possible to run on a sort of workstation environment or a cloud computing environment, and translate them onto an embedded system, or like on the edge in cloud lingo, in a way that allows us then to affect the kind of customer outcomes and end user outcomes that we can affect, and that are really differentiated. So I think it's been that translation exercise has been incredibly important for the business. Challenge wise, I think continuing to replicate that as we scale into maybe closer to a growth stage company, or a company now with very many more team members. I think that is, let's say, maybe one of the challenges that we are laser focused on, not only because our ambition doesn't stop at the existing products that we have today. And I think we see a lot of exciting opportunity to build more. And I think we want to retain, let's say, the level of diligence that we applied to that translation process going forwards.
Yeah. It's interesting. I speak to actually know a lot of founders and CEOs in their various journeys. And initially, the wearing of many hats clearly brings both challenges and rewards, and really stretches you, and you can feel energized by that. But the gist sometimes is that as you start then to grow, which is great because you bring team members, they bring new things, new skills, etc. But you end up becoming the point of receiving. The only things that you get to deal with is the problems that need solving. I don't know how you've evolved, and that's perhaps a negative way of putting it, but essentially you're there now to solve some of the bottlenecks or solve some of the problems, which perhaps takes you away from some of the stuff that maybe you really, really enjoyed in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for sure. I mean, the CEO role to some extent, but I'd say more generally than that, the founder role is certainly that one of making sure that if whatever the issue is that the company encounters at any point in time, that it ultimately gets solved in a timely, cost-efficient, and sort of risk-managed manner, right?
Yeah.
But I think from then sort of balancing that with sort of the enjoyment side of it as well. I mean, I'm sitting today as we're doing this podcast on top of about 7,500 square foot of battery laboratory, which is now increasingly becoming one of closer to, or if not one of the largest now in Europe, especially in terms of its uniqueness of capability for running software in the loop with batteries, which is what our customers demand. And I think this industry is certainly tracking towards now as it adopts more of our software. And I think being this kind of facility, seeing what our team is doing, and then seeing the battery systems firsthand that our customers are shipping out from China, from mainland Europe, from North America, from all around the world. And that is, I founded it for the reasons that we spoke about, of course, but it's certainly, I think, still enjoy this proximity to the battery systems. And I think never more than today have I seen such a throughput of battery systems in our company. So I think still very enjoyable to be so close to that.
Yeah, it's great to physically see. It's nice when you can physically see the growth and evolution and the work that you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about the business model, because obviously you're software enabling batteries. Is your business model a SaaS one, or do you sell embedded product, or do you license the IP? How do you sort of interact with your clients, and what's the business model?
Yeah, exactly. So our customers start with an engagement with us, usually by providing their battery cells or battery system, depending on the size of that, be it maybe consumer electronics, it would usually be a battery pack, or an automotive, maybe usually battery cell. So it simply makes it a little bit more sense size-wise, but providing us that. And what we are able to do then is get incredibly deep, incredibly fast, and supporting them to see then how our product, our software, when applied to their battery system, helps further some of their, let's say, goals and targets that they have to increase enhance, let's say, the outcome for their customers or the end user. And that might be maybe a corporate level goal, such as sustainability, which we fulfill very well with Oppo today, by way of example, having increased the sort of handset life cycle from 2 years up to 4 years by increasing the durability. Maybe it's product goals that they have, or maybe it's end user goals, like they want to decrease the amount of downtime charging your laptop between meetings by increasing the charging experience. So we map these with our customers, and then we run a dual, let's say, program of usually product validation towards a target platform, and then simultaneously then a licensing process.
Right.
Our customers are typically then licensing on a platform basis. And I think, Volvo is a good example of that today, whereas one of our large automotive customers, they're licensing our product Breathe Charge for the underlying vehicle platform on which they will ship very many cars, different car models into the future.
Yeah.
So then, let's say how we then drive revenue in the business, of course, then is a royalty paying model. And I think sort of analogously very similar to, if you look at Dolby in the audio space, licensing Dolby Digital or Dolby Vision, or ARM in the semiconductor space with its, in that case, IP licensing of semiconductors.
Yeah. Jumping back to the move into having that kind of traction that you've achieved over a relatively short period of time. By definition, a lot of these corporates and OEMs are hard to navigate. They're quite big beasts often. They have many stakeholders, and it can be tough as a startup to knock on that door and get an opportunity to show your wares and to pitch what it is that you're able to do. So, were you leading on some of those conversations, and how have you been able to attract and start to working with some of these globally large players, Volvo as a prime example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure, when we started the company, and I think we had relatively less experience inside the organization, we had the same question of how to do that, especially with such, as you say, large brands. I think ultimately what we've seen works time and time again. It's both enjoyable as well as, I'd say, that the right mechanism in terms of what works is establishing a great degree of technical credibility with these organizations.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, let's say what we do is we do work with the pinnacle in terms of battery experts in the world inside our customer organizations. They are undoubtedly the best of the best across both the automotive space and the consumer electronics space. And I think in order to win the, let's say, appreciation and to win or justify our time in a seat in front of them, we need to be able to interact with them on an equally, let's say, pinnacle level. And for that reason, I mean, today and historically, the way we've built our business is on the back of finding the best battery engineering talent, and more broadly engineering talent from around the world. I think that has meant that we've sourced out candidates from so many different countries. I think there are probably 13, 14 different nationalities. We have 120 years of battery engineering experience in aggregate now inside what is still a relatively small team. And I think that is then on par with very many of our customers today to make sure that they are getting the level of quality of interaction that they deserve and that they expect inside their organization and outside. And that sort of gains us the permission to, I think, maybe have enough of an audience to be able to listen to what it is that they're trying to achieve. Yeah. And once we've had the chance to listen, to be able to react and help them.
That critical credibility. You touched on something there which I find really fascinating, because again, one of the challenges for any founder and startup that we work with or that I've mentored over the years through accelerators is that combination of having, of course, the product market fit and all that kind of stuff is essential, of course, for a start point, but then it's the scaling the team to enable growth, and of course then being able to pay for and afford the growth. So there's that fundraising challenge, and then there's the sort of the talent challenges, and they can take a lot of time. I just wonder how you've dealt with that, and how much of your time is focused on those areas, perhaps as much as, if not more, than the actual product evolution.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, scaling the team and making sure that the business is healthily financed is a core part of the responsibility of my job here in the business today at Breathe. But also, just a core, let's say, facet of what's required to make any startup successful. I think, to a degree, I suppose there's the element of luck involved, there's the element of sort of strategic timing involved in starting a battery company. It's certainly spinning out of the Imperial College in 2019 with them. I think significant experience that sort of we had generated as a co-founding team. Yeah. That was a good launch pad, and it was and is a good time in history to be at the forefront of solving the battery challenges that we are solving with the technology and products that we build. And I think that means two things. That probably the financing requirements of the business, they're relatively easier to fulfill than I think probably at any other point in history. And I think simultaneously, in one respect, the hiring then is for that reason also probably relatively easier than at any point in history, in respect of that there's a great amount of talent out there in the world that is highly motivated to create a better outcome for us as we age, and also for our kids and future generations by tackling climate problems and air pollution problems. So there's a huge there's a huge cohort of motivated talent to draw on. I'd say maybe the challenge or the flip side of that is that probably maybe as a society we aren't producing battery engineers at the rate that we need to quite keep pace with both some of the regulatory drivers that are impacting what needs to happen with electrification, and also the demand of companies like ourselves and like our customers on acquiring that talent. And I think that does then create a competitive talent acquisition market around it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Something we know very well. We've like yourself, we've moved some fairly phenomenal people around the world for organizations like yours, which is great. Partly, again, something of timing. There's the opportunity, and also in the post-COVID world, a realization that actually we've got a much more mobile access to talent, a much more mobile workforce in many instances. But there is obviously, I should say, demand outstrips supplying for companies in that space. Talk to us a little bit more then about also the culture, because it's, again, bringing lots of incredibly smart and talented people together is a challenge, but actually then embedding your culture as that team scales from 2 to 4 to 8 to 10 to 20, you start to grow exponentially in numbers, but it can be quite challenging to maintain the mission and the values that you started the organization with. Perhaps you can touch on a little bit how the culture of the business and how you're sort of trying to make sure that remains as you scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we reflect back on when we started to codify the culture that we were inherently developing in the company, it was a number of years ago now, maybe two or more years ago. We started to get quite explicit about it, especially as we scale the team. Today at this sort of moment in time, I think we're around the 40-person full-time mark. Yeah, I do think that we've an incredibly enjoyable culture to work in, an incredibly healthy culture, and one at the same time that is quite high performing. I think that's really mandatory, I think, not only for us, but also because the customer expectations that the market has on us are high, and where they have pressure in their organizations to electrify or to improve the end user experience, and they need a partner they can repeatedly rely on and trust. I think what worked initially incredibly well in the business, partly because it had a great sort of return on investment from an engineering development perspective, as well as from engaging with our customers, where they had a great appreciation for the time efficiency and the realness of it, is a couple of values, including, saying it like it is, which is one of our core values today, where I think, unfortunately, I'd say that the battery industry, relative to maybe some other industries, tends to be maybe relatively more guilty of overstating some of the claims. I think not only shying away from that, but I think going as far as we could in the other direction, to be so real at every moment in time about what is and isn't possible. I think that cultural trait has served our business and our customers or indirectly then so incredibly well that that's a core tenet of what we carry forwards in the culture is being incredibly real about the situation with our customers.
Right.
I think at the same time, innovating quickly is a key part of our cultural values and our cultural makeup. Because we do certainly need to move fast to meet then the obligations that our customers have. And also because I think there's a very time-limited window of opportunity right now where we as an organization have great visibility of what is required product-wise and technology-wise for the next half and full decade. And we think in many respects ahead of much of the market. And we want to execute on that, of course. And then maybe similarly, I think around this topic of moving fast, being, I think, direct with what we're saying, and then innovating as well from first principles, I think is one of the core values that we carry forwards, because it makes a colossal difference in when years compound on technology and product developments, and we do it from a first principles approach, where we've really torn down, should this be built a certain way, and making sure that we're absolutely not following the herd for following the herd's sake. Right. I think that then yields some quite differentiated products, some quite differentiated value propositions, and then ultimately helps us build up what we need to build up, which is a degree of defensibility, a degree of uniqueness in the market, so that we can establish the kind of brand credibility that we have and are increasingly establishing today as the go-to supplier of the best battery performance software for the battery system.
Right. Right. Okay. So let's jump back again to something you touched on in terms of you need a bit of luck and you need some good timing. Absolutely. Any startup has a number of success factors, and a wee bit of luck is always one of those. And timing is a good part of that. So on the one hand, we live in a time where the demand and the transition towards an electrification of many, if not most, if not everything, drives opportunity. But also the speed of so many changes in terms of from a hardware, from a chemistry's perspective, obviously from software enablement perspective, as you well know, cost decreases, energy improvements, all these kinds of. There's so much going on in the space at the moment. How do you navigate that in terms of being focused on where you as a business can most take advantage of all that's going on in the marketplace at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a really good question, because I think it's a really real element of any business, particularly one that's scaling in a fast-moving environment, like you say. I think that there's a strong cultural element, sort of like drawing from the last sort of topic of discussion here, around making sure that we are listening more than we are speaking, like on the whole as a business. And then particularly for our team members that have the luxury and the enjoyment of being quite customer-facing, making sure that then what is happening in the market around what our customers are experiencing, what their concerns are, and the general, let's say, ebbs and flows or activities in the marketplace, that we're understanding what it is that's taking place, and then have the information on which to make decisions and act around what we do and what we build. Yeah. I think that's certainly a good part of it. I think that on the other hand, there's this incredibly hardcore need to be incredibly focused, it also in an incredibly hardcore way, because there is so much opportunity to do a lot. And for any startup, and we are no different in that respect, it would be perfectly possible to try to swallow too much too soon.
Exactly.
And I think that staying away from that on the right side of that, let's say, curve is critically important. And I think maybe strategically how we, let's say, view it is to try and, of course, understand what's happening around us, but then try to design both our positioning, but also our offering to our customers and our product portfolio in a way that's really complementary to much of what else is happening. And I really, I suppose, our complementarity to the cell chemistries and cell materials that are coming through from new cell suppliers in the market today is, I think, a very strong example of us achieving that. Partly because that just creates an overall sort of 1 + 1 = more than 2 scenario for the industry, but also because it creates resiliency then to any kind of shocks or surprises or any kind of sudden changes in the industry as well.
Yeah, no, it's super tough as an entrepreneur not to chase the shiny stuff because it's shiny, and it's always there's always an appeal that you think, well, this is the thing that's going to move the dial forward. So having that laser focus is critically important. Taking, I guess, a little bit of a helicopter view or a gaze into a crystal ball beyond purely brief technologies. If we look at the markets that evolve, two particularly interesting. One is an EV driver and someone in the battery space for many years. Obviously, that's a big driver. Looking at how you see the next few years from an electrical vehicle battery perspective. But you also touched there on wearables being a part of your marketplace. Now, I'm convinced that there will see an uptake of where and how there are applications for wearables and devices, IoT devices, that's an example. So where do you see a part for you guys to play in those particular areas in particular?
Yeah, I think that what is different across these different markets, and I think it's certainly no surprise to those markets themselves, but nor to somebody that's operating at the intersection of them like us, is that the priorities are maybe a little bit different across them. And I think that in wearables today, especially, I think what we see so strongly is that the runtime is critical, and therefore the energy density of the battery system is critical, right? I mean, what you don't want, if you're about the brand that's producing the wearable, or if it is you as the end user that's wearing the wearable, is you don't want to be forced into a situation of downtime where then you can't use the wearable that should be, or let's say its value is sort of in being always on, right? So I think that market, I think we see certainly into the near future at least, increasingly seeking out greater energy density and greater runtime, or scenarios that even solutions that say that minimize downtime, right? And I think that, let's say, is an area in which today we're rather active with Breathe Charge on downtime minimization, so that we can create the best user experience. I think in automotive, I think it's it's already gone through a couple of years of flux as, let's say, much of the industry starts to figure out the battery system in the many levels of detail that it needs to be figured out, that now understands that it's the replacement for the engine and rather than the fuel tank, and that it's also the new opportunity to differentiate their brands between themselves. But I think one big contrasting factor between, let's say, that consumer electronics space and this automotive space is the cost. It's multiple orders of magnitude greater there in the electric car market, or the more widely the transport market.
Yeah.
And I think that drives a different behavior. And I think that sort of different behavior will drive different outcomes in the coming years that are much more focused around value and price to performance ratio in automotive, rather than, let's say, absolute performance maximization on a particular axis of the battery performance, like in consumer electronics, where to a degree, the cost is less relevant when it's a $1 to $20 or $30 battery pack.
Yeah. Just touch on that briefly, because obviously we touched on the relationship and the investment from Volvo. If we look at not just with Volvo, but for the automotive sector, which is, I guess, core to a lot of what our clients and audience are interested in. I think what I've seen as an EV driver is, as the charging infrastructure has improved significantly, range anxiety is more a thing of the press than a reality amongst the community. But it's interesting to know whether your customers are still, and I know we started by saying you try and solve a problem, we don't compromise one for the other, but I'm just intrigued to whether you're seeing people more still focused on the energy density and therefore the sort of the range essentially, or just how quickly you can charge and get away. Is there any kind of thought process or something you see in the sector as to where the priorities lie for some of the OEMs you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think speaking in regards to the sector as a whole, or the market as a whole, rather than any one entity, absolutely. I think maybe historically what we have seen, and I think it was reflected for sure in some heavy coverage in the press, was around this getting to the point of achieving a minimum range with the vehicles, so that we could certainly cover our daily driving, but more than that as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think, let's say, to a degree, more or less, we are there today with vehicle ranges of a couple of 100 kilometers. And I think finding that many end users, many drivers are sort of finding a good balance between how much downtime and uptime. I think maybe where the industry perspective or the market perspective in automotive is shifting is towards an overall more holistic balancing. I think balance might be the right word. And balancing of these different attributes across the charging experience, which is absolutely critical, not only to the experience, but also to the purchasing behavior of the EVs today. How quickly does it charge, but also how consistently does it charge? How reliable is that charge across different temperature environments? If you're living and driving in the Nordics, living and driving in the Med, for example, or depending upon what point you are in the lifetime of that vehicle as well. Is your charging experience as good as it was when it was new?
Yep.
Or if not, I mean, how far off is it, and why is that? And is that in line with the cost of the car that I've paid for?
Yeah.
So I think this consistency and the charging experience overall as an entity, the range, and at the same time, then the balancing of these attributes with the cost. And I think that there's an increasingly strong awakening or deepening of understanding in the automotive industry around the enormous opportunity for system level optimization of the battery system with itself as a system. The battery cell is, of course, a system, but then system level optimization with these other subsystems in the vehicle, and the packaging of all of that together with software defined batteries as battery functions or software functions increasingly come online and support extracting more from the battery. There's a huge opportunity to change the price to performance ratio of the overall system. And I think that what we'll then see is maybe certainly hopefully less focus in the press than on one metric, let's say range, but rather than a more complete and holistic reflection of what the automotive industry is transitioning to, with a much better balanced offering of cost and performance across these attributes. I think what we will see is that significantly changes in the next years.
Okay. Okay, we certainly would be interesting to view that. We could talk forever. So the topic area is so large, but it's been great to spend some time with you, Ian, to share some of the experiences that you've had personally, and of course the journey and the technology beyond Breathe. We'll make sure that we point on the episode page to places where people can find out more, to your website, to your social media, and to yourselves on LinkedIn, so that people can find out some more should they wish to do so. But brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian, for sharing what you shared with us today, and I hope to see much more of you on your journey ahead.
Thank you very much. Likewise, super enjoyable, David.